Welcome to Frameworks. This is a place for coaches who want more than just reps and sets. We dig into principles, philosophy, and stories that help you coach with clarity, design with purpose, and to keep chasing mastery. Today, we're talking about building a simple 3-day per week strength training program. So we're not talking about a template that you simply copy and paste. We are talking about a principle-based system that you can scale to any client. So it's going to be simple enough to repeat, strong enough to elicit change, and flexible enough to fit in your client's real life situations. So today I'm going to talk about 5 frameworks that make 3-day programming clear. We're going to talk about context, patterns, letting the goal be the goal, daily structure, and progression. So let's get into it. So we're going to dig into strength training, specifically around this 3-day per week split. But before we do, I just want to talk about why I thought it was worth the time to actually spend with you guys and talk about this. Number one, I've used this split for myself for probably the last 8 to 10 years. And I do other things outside of those 3 days, but usually I just focus on 3 days per week, and we'll dig into structural pieces and how we can organize that for anyone, for the beginner to learn in motor control, for the more advanced to continue to refine motor control, get stronger, explore different movements, and get enough volume so that they continue to adapt to and from. So that's why we're talking about this 3-day per week strength training program. I think that it's really easy for us to build as coaches because there's a lot of days that we have to play with in a week, right? Like we're playing with 7 days, and if we're trying to fit 5 days of resistance in those 7 days, it gets a little more complicated and a little bit more nuanced on how people can recover and how do we order certain exercises or patterns of movement around those things. So the 3 days per week makes it really simple. With it only being 3 days per week, or maybe not only, because there's some people that don't lift at all, or there's some people where they struggle to get in 1 or 2, but landing on this 3-day per week, in terms of split, I'm only going to talk about full body resistance today because I just don't think it makes much sense to organize a training split around any other thing outside of full body resistance because we only have 3 days to play with. So because we have those 3 days, it's like, let's get as much upper and lower body frequency in resistance training as we can over those 3 days, and I'll dig more into that. Okay, so the principles or the frameworks I'm going to walk through today. Number one, it's going to be context. Context is going to be the thing that tells us what's possible based on the person in which we're working with. That's always really, really important. Then we're going to talk about patterns. And patterns, I like talking about patterns because they keep us honest, and it's also very simple once we organize our brain to connect specific exercises to the main patterns of movement in which those exercises train. Next, we're going to talk about priorities. And priorities are good because it keeps us focused as coaches. After that, I'll talk about structure and how we structure these training days because it just creates this framework for us to make it executable when we're sitting down and actually designing training programs. And then finally, I'm going to talk about progression. I think progression is really important for us to think about and for us to, I guess, quote unquote, like be good with, because it puts us at ease as coaches, right? Sometimes we feel a certain type of way about giving someone something and just like letting them do that thing for a number of weeks without changing anything. Or maybe we don't understand the exact levers that we can pull so we can start to actually progress that client. So I just want to spend a little bit of time and talk about progression as well. First, we have to talk about context. And before we start to talk about our client's context, let's think about our own context as a coach. We're going to talk about client goals here in a second, but we always have to understand and be aligned to what our intention is for every client that's on our client roster. Okay, and that doesn't mean that you have to, ask all of your clients to conform to what you believe their goals for them should be. But when we look at that at a macro level, we kind of do have to do that. So what I mean by that, it's like if you're a coach and you're like, I coach people because I want people to live the most vital lives that they can possibly live. And that's like, the theme across all of your clientele. You have to keep that in mind in terms of context for yourself. Okay, or maybe your context is, I want someone to perform at their absolute best in everything that they do in their lives, right? Like that's your like grounding context as a coach. So you have to keep that in mind. Then we start to look at the client. We have to look at their goals. We have to look at their capabilities, their experiences, their movement quality, their ability to coordinate through all of these patterns of movement that we're going to talk about next. Then we have to start thinking about their schedule. How much time do they have to train? So we're saying for purposes of this conversation, that they're training 3 times per week, but what do those blocks look like? Is it 20 minutes? Is it 40 minutes? Is it 90 minutes? Like how much time do we have to work with? We're looking at their equipment. Do they train in a commercial gym with, every piece of equipment you could imagine? Are they training in their garage gym with a barbell, some dumbbells, and maybe a kettlebell? We have to really think about what they have access to in terms of equipment. Then injuries, right? Like, are there things that we have to work around, or are there things that we're trying to work through or get better? What is their training history? Are they a beginner, right? Like, and that kind of connects to what their goals are, or what their goals should be based on their capabilities. Are they a beginner trainee, intermediate, advanced? That's going to shift actually what you're putting in their program design. What are their stressors in life? Okay, like what do they have going on at work? Is their marriage good? Is there a lot of stress there? Kids, is there a lot of stress with the kids? Do they have to be here and there and there and there? And you're just adding one more thing, saying that now I need you to, etch away 60 minutes to do this 3 times per week. Like, just understanding those daily life stressors. And then kind of going along with that, just understanding what their schedule is. Monday, Wednesday, Friday training split is ideal because it's easy for our brains to wrap around, and we know that we have a day of recovery between each, or whatever the case is. But what if that schedule is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? Does that change your program design at all? It actually should, because now we have to start really thinking about interference from one day to another. So if we ignore this context, our program becomes friction for the person in which we're giving it to. And that's why we truly believe in individualization, not hyper individualization, but we do believe that all of our programs should be individualized, obviously, to the person that is doing them. And you guys have probably heard this before, but it's like the best program is the best program for the person in which is doing it. Okay, so we can't just look at 2 program designs on paper and say this program is good and this program is not, because we don't know who it's for and we don't have all of this context. Okay, so just a couple quick examples for you guys. So if you have a parent with 35 minutes per session, and they have to be in and out, they start that clock and then at 35 minutes they got to be out of there. That training program is going to be different than the 32-year-old with 90 minutes to train. A client with cranky shoulder and they have some stuff going on, they still might be able to do the push pattern, but you choose push variations that respects the joint, that respects their limitations, and that hopefully moves them forward instead of setting them back. Another one is a client under high work stress can build strength, right? But you have to make sure that the strength program is appropriate for them. So you're managing volume, you're managing intensity, and you're doing it appropriately. You're doing it intentionally. So those are just some examples of context and how we need to first think about context before we start sitting down and designing training programs. The second framework, we're going to start thinking about structure, organization, exercise selection, all of those things. But at the foundation, it's taking this pattern-based approach when you design training programs. So there's a lot of ways to skin this cat, guys. Like I've built so many splits that were muscle-based, pattern-based, intent-based, velocity-based, so many things. But I always come back to patterns, and patterns just being the most simple. Okay, so the way that we teach it here at OPEX is we talk about the 6 foundational patterns. So we talk about squat, lunge, bend, push, pull, and then the core pattern. So 6 patterns. Okay, so if we're training 3 days per week, we don't need a bunch of complexity in terms of, let's call it priorities throughout the week or within a given training day. We need coverage. So what I mean by that is, and I said it at the top, it's like we don't want to spend day 1 just doing push, and day 2 doing pull, and day 3 doing legs, and then it's like I need to wait an entire new week before I now hit frequency in those patterns again. Okay, we want more coverage here, and that's why at the top I said, hey, what we're going to talk about today is full body resistance. So now, with that context, we need to think about how do we organize these patterns within a given training day across a given training week. So this would just be making up a cycle, right? So there's some carryover rules, okay? Number 1, if you have a heavy squat priority on a given day, you likely do not need a lunge on that same day, okay? And then vice versa. So if I'm, squatting on a day, maybe I don't lunge on that same day. right? Maybe I'm overloading knee flexion, unilateral or bilateral squat pattern, some people call it. We just separate those and we call them squatting and lunging. So if you're squatting on one day, maybe you don't need to lunge. If you're lunging on that day, maybe you don't need to squat, okay? Next, if you have a big compound lift with strong bracing demands, you may not need direct core work that day. Okay, so I did say that core was that 6 pattern of movement, but let's be honest, we're using our core in all exercises that we do, especially if we're doing big compound multi-joint movements. So if you're doing those and there's a lot of bracing demand, maybe you don't need to do ab wheel rollouts or crunches or GHD sit-ups or whatever the case is. Nothing wrong with those exercises, but maybe you don't need to prioritize those days. Maybe there's some lower hanging fruit that you can do that doesn't see you directly hitting the core. Okay. Another example, if your pull is heavy and grip intensive, don't stack a ton of extra grip work. So we see this all the time where there's like a heavy bend emphasis. So just think like deadlifting and things like that, where we're grabbing a heavy load relatively off the ground. And then we're also doing a lot of pull work that day. So like strict pull-ups, right? You're going to see an inability to express those patterns to their highest degree within those days if you're doing a lot of grip intensive work that kind of has interference on those days. So when we train in patterns, it gives us structure, but when we start to think about carryover, so we could talk about this in terms of carryover or interference, this gives us some restraint. Okay, so those are just some carryover things that I want you guys thinking about before you start actually thinking about putting pen to paper or fingers to keypads and actually building your program design. The next framework I'm going to talk about is letting the goal be the goal. And this is where I think a lot of coaches get, I don't know, sloppy maybe is the wrong term, but they just get too eager. There you go. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And what I mean by that is because the coach only has 3 days to put in program design, they try to fit way too many things, way too many priorities specifically within each one of those days. Okay, so let's let the goal be the goal for every single training day. Okay, so a 3-day program needs focus. So what I recommend is 1 priority movement per day, maybe 2, but you're always safer with just 1 priority movement per day. Okay, that priority sets the tone. It drives the intended adaptation or the priority adaptation for that day, and it gets the best energy and attention for that day. And this movement is usually compound or multi-joint. So let me give you some examples. So I'll just walk through examples for each pattern of movement. Let's talk about the squat first. So the squat would be things like the back squat, the front squat, safety bar squat. For some people, it would be like putting a kettlebell in the front rack and doing goblet squats. That is multi-joint, and it's compound for some folks that really don't have the ability to put a heavy barbell on their back or in the front rack and squat in that variation. So it'd just be all squatting variations that are multi-joint and compound. When we get to the bend pattern, just think of all the deadlift variations, right? You have your conventional deadlift, your stiff leg deadlift, your Romanian deadlift, your deficit deadlift, your trap bar deadlift. There's so many variations that we could put there. But we could also do like a good morning. So it could be a barbell good morning. It could be a kettlebell good morning. It could also be a barbell hip thrust. Those would all fall under the bend pattern. When we get to lunging, we could do split squats, we can do step ups, we can do reverse lunges, we could do walking lunges, and we could do those with a bunch of different implements. Safety bars, barbells, front rack barbells. We could do those with trap bars with an opening in the back. So many variations that we could do there, but we could also just do them with dumbbells and kettlebells as well. Now going to the push pattern, we have all bench press variations, right? Wide grip, conventional, close grip, multi-grip bench press. All those variations would fall here, as well as all the shoulder press variations. Then when we get to pull, we have all the pull-up variations, or we could talk about like pen lays or bent over rows. Lat pull downs could be a good one. Chest supported rows with barbells or dumbbells or kettlebells. Those could all be more compound multi-joint pulling exercises. Then when we get to the core is a little bit tricky. This will likely not be a priority directly, but all of those exercises that I just talked about are using the core in a significant way. Okay, so when we start talking about multi-joint and compound movements, we're definitely using the core to brace, right? Just think about a really solid front squat. You're not going to see someone have a really solid front squat and a terribly weak core. You're not going to see someone have a really solid good morning and a terribly weak core. Okay, so it goes across the board. We're using the core pattern in all of these compound multi-joint exercises, especially the lower bodies, so the squat, the lunge, and the bend patterns. Okay, we can go down a bunch of different rabbit holes. I'll start to go down this rabbit hole here, and then I'll continue in the next framework. But now we're talking about where do these priorities go in the session. So like I said, they go first in the design, okay? It can be standalone or it can be paired with a non-competing, non-priority movement. So examples of priority pairings, okay? So these are just like A series. So let's think about A1, A2. But again, remember, they can just be A's and they can just be alone, but I'll talk about that next. So examples of priority pairings. So if we're prioritizing the squat, maybe we're doing the back squat, and then we're going to do an accessory or a non-priority movement, and we'll call it a pull, so it'll be lat pull downs. So A1 back squat, A2 lat pull down. Okay, next, let's go push and bend. Okay, so push, we can do bench press as A1, and then A2 accessory. For the bend, we could do a prone hamstring curl. And then finally, let's talk about bend and push as well, okay? So bend, if that's priority, we can do a trap bar dead, okay? So that's A1, and then A2, maybe we're doing a seated dumbbell press, okay? And that would be our push, specifically our vertical push pattern, okay? So there's a lot of ways to skin it, but you just wanna make sure that you're avoiding conflict, right? So if back squatting is my priority, I'm not going to superset that with a lunge. If back squatting is my priority, I'm going to stay away from even the bend. And the reason is because I want to go upper lower or lower upper in the same supersets as much as I can, so I make sure I hit or I get enough exposure of upper and lower, because remember, we're doing full body sessions. All right, let's now go to our next framework, and we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into daily sessions or daily structure of our training sessions. Okay, so there's a lot of ways to do this. Two things I want to focus on specifically are, pairing and non-pairing, okay? And it's mostly to do with the priorities that we just talked about. When I say pairing, I just mean supersetting. Okay, so just setting the tone really quick, we are still doing full body sessions. So in every one of these sessions, we need to hit, let's call it like 1-to-1, unless there's a reason to do it differently, 1-to-1 upper lower. Okay, so we want to do as close to 1-to-1 upper lower as we can, and we can get more nuanced, and some days can be upper biased and other days be lower biased, but let's keep it really simple today. Okay, so option 1 will just be supersets across. Okay, so a structure that I really like is A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. Okay, so that is six exercises or 3 supersets, okay? But remember, we talked about in the last framework, in letting the goal be the goal, A1 will always be priority in this setting, unless A1, A2 are like more preparatory pieces, or we're like intentionally hitting some accessories to get ready for that priority. Okay, so A1, A2, B1, B2, and C1, C2. So this is very clean, it's very time efficient, it's very easy to repeat. When you set out your weekly structure and you talk about like what is priority for the day, just order it in this way, okay? So I'm gonna give you a few examples. Example number 1 is going to be if we're walking through a training day and the priority is the squat priority, okay? So in this scenario, A1 would be back squat, okay, squat pattern. A2 would be a chest supported row. Okay, that would be a pull pattern. B1, we're gonna do push. And remember, I did my A1, A2 already, so my priority, the big movement for the day, maybe we can think about this as like our progressive movement for the cycle. We've already done it. A1 is that back squat, okay? A1 back squat, A2 chest supported row, B1 incline dumbbell press, B2, we might do something like a prone hamstring curl again. And then continuing C1, let's do a lunge pattern. So we'll do a dumbbell split squat. And then C2, let's throw in core. So we'll do some carries, okay? So just to repeat that really quick, A1 back squat, A2 chest supported row, B1 incline dumbbell press, B2 prone hamstring curl, C1 split squat, and C2, we're gonna do some carries. Okay, so that's an example of supersets across, or we're just doing, pairing across the board. And remembering A1 is always our priority. Okay, next we could also do something that's like priority first, like really letting the goal be the goal, and that just standing on its own. And then we add some volume after that. So an example of this would just be like A, and then we do B1, B2, C1, C2, and then you can add a D1, D2 if time allows. Okay, so that would be, if we did the A and then B1 all the way to C2, that would be 5 exercises, so 1 less than the last option. That's why I really like the first option, because it gives us the ability to be really efficient and get some good volume in, okay? And then if we went with the D1 and D2, now we're really getting it in, guys. So that would be 7 exercises. So it would be A, B1, B2, C1, C2, and then if time allows, D1 and D2. So this works great when you want a very clear priority. It's like, I want the priority for the day to just stand on its own. So let's walk through another example of this. So let's shift up the priority pattern, and the priority pattern in this example is going to be the push pattern. So let's say A, we're going to stand all alone and we're going to go the incline bench press. So this is absolute priority for the day. And then let's just do our, non-priority or accessory work after this. So it could look like B1 is a lat pull down. B2, we're going to do some dumbbell step ups. C1, we're going to do some GHD hip extensions for the bend pattern. C2, for the row pattern, we're going to do some row variations. So let's call it some bent over dumbbell rows, or maybe some bent over rear delt flies. And then D1, remember these are the optional pieces. D1, we could just go like core heavy. We could do some carries, farmer carries, and then we could do some kind of like trunk rotation or anti-rotation work, like a payloft press or something like that. So the structure is not, or the structure in general isn't where like the magic happens. The structure just makes it executable, okay? So, option A versus option B, choose whatever you want, or create an option C, but you see where I'm going with this, where it's like an even split of upper lower, and we're also making sure that the priority is the priority in all of these structures, or both of these structures. Okay, and finally, let's talk about progression. Okay, so I think that progression is probably the most overcomplicated thing for a lot of coaches, and it really shouldn't be. We just need to understand what progression means for this particular client in this particular cycle. And once you make that decision, it should be pretty simple to progress week over week over week, okay? And thinking about this, we have to understand the levers of progression. So I just want to point out a few, okay? Lever number 1 is intensity. So you want someone to increase load over time, okay? So if this is the lever, you're going to keep reps or volume static, or you're going to decrease volume or reps and ask them to increase load. So in week 1, if you're doing 5 back squats, and in week 2, you're doing 5 again, and the note is, hey, I want you to bump up by, 5 pounds or 10 pounds from last week, cool. But another option is, if week 1 is 5 back squats, week 2 might be 4 to 5 back squats. So it's like, hey, I want you to still reach for 5, but if you hit 4, that's cool. And that's cool because we're increasing load this week, okay? So lever number 1 is going to be load. Lever number 2 is going to be volume. Okay, so this might be volume in sets, this could be volume in reps, or just volume in total work done. Okay, so sets in week 1, if you're doing, 5 reps times 3 sets in the back squat, and week 2, you just want to increase volume, and you're like, you only want to do this through sets, so you're just adding another set. Okay, so you're going to add another set of 5, and here you don't want to pull too many levers. So maybe you just keep load static from last week, and the only lever that you're pulling is you're adding more sets. And the same is to be said with reps. If you're doing 5 reps week 1, week 2, if you want to add another rep and you're doing 6, your goal in doing that isn't to decrease load. Your goal is to keep load static, because the lever that's being pulled is the volume or the reps, and you don't want to decrease the load or the intensity while pulling that other lever, if that makes sense. Next lever is just, let's call it exposure, right? Like, we don't always have to have like objective progressive measures in a program design. I know our coach brains really want to look at that and get connected to that, because it's evidence of progress week over week over week, and I get it. But sometimes just exposure to doing movement is good enough. So it's like, we're doing 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, feel out the load. If you feel like you want to hit the same load as last week, do it. If you're feeling a little, tired today and you want to do 5% less, that's completely fine. But exposure can actually be good enough. Just exposure, practice, getting good at movement, and just moving their bodies and going through those muscular contractions is really beneficial for most people. But I get it. If you have like a strength athlete, that's not a good lever to pull. You're not just like, yep, just go in and kind of lift weights however you want to feel today, right? That's probably not going to get them stronger. So this one might be out if you're working with a power lifter and you're like, hey, we have 8 weeks to our meet and we need to get stronger in the squat. Okay. Next lever is range of motion. So what if you're working with someone and they have like a pretty good squat and you're like, hey, I want to increase or improve our range of motion. And this is like our progressive lever, right? And you're asking them to go deeper and deeper and deeper, a bigger stretch at the bottom, maybe a longer pause at the bottom or whatever the case is. But you want their range of motion to increase over the series of this cycle. That's also progression. Okay, so in exposure, we should be doing exposure with better movement week over week, and range of motion can be one of those levers that we pull. The next lever that we can pull is one that I would reserve for like the intermediate to advanced, and that would be exercise selection. Okay, so just the fact that we have to adapt to a new exercise or a fresh exercise that we didn't do last week is progression. Okay. Principally we want it to be, harder, more complex for that person, but it doesn't always have to be. An example of that would be week 1, you do back squats. Week 2, you do front squats. Week 3, you do safety bar squats. Week 4, you do cyclist squats. You see what I mean there? So it's like, don't really care that the weight is not getting more and more and more based on the exercise selection. But the challenge is that you're doing a new compound multi-joint squat exercise, and that's the lever that I'm pulling. But again, if you want to get super specific, you can load it in a way like this, where you can go, I want you to do a front squat, and then I want you to do a cyclist back squat, and then I want you to do a back squat, and then I want to finish with a box squat. So for most people, intensity is going to go up over time. So you can kind of mix those two levers or those ideas together in one as a progressive mechanism. Next lever we can pull is tempo, okay, the speed in which they're moving. Maybe you want to start at a 5-second eccentric in week 1, and you're going to work your way down to a 2-second eccentric. Naturally, they're going to be able to lift more weight over that time because time under tension per set is less, assuming that volume stays static or the same. Okay, so you can adjust tempo. So you can go faster, you can go slower, you can wave load tempo from week to week. A lot of options there. Another lever that we can pull is rest time. Okay, so this kind of mirrors up with our last lever, which is density. So same work in less time. So we can manipulate rest time. Okay, we can challenge people if we're trying to improve like strength endurance, or we're trying to get, we're trying to use resistance training to be a more of a metabolic bout. We could start at 2 minutes of rest in the same program, and we can knock down 15 seconds of rest every single set, every week, I should say, from set to set. Okay, or we can increase rest in assuming that someone's going to lift more weight because they have more rest. Okay, and then that last lever is just density. Okay, so this is the same work in less amount of time. So if you're saying, hey, I want you to decrease your rest time, but I want you to keep loads exactly the same, you're increasing density. Okay, so just to give you guys a really simple approach for 3-day strength block, keep the priority lift stable for 4 to 6 weeks, however long that program is. Progress one variable at a time, unless that variable is exercise selection, but I would save that for like the higher end, intermediate, or advanced individuals. If recovery dips, reduce volume before you abandon the plan, right? Like rule of thumb for me, it's been this for many years, is I don't change anything unless I see that the issue is trending, right? So if I see it happen 2+ times, I don't abandon a plan, unless there's an obvious reason to abandon it, of course. But that keeps us from like just shifting the plan week over week because something didn't go exactly the way that we wanted it to go in our initial plan. Okay, so progress only what the client can recover from. I think that's a really important point to think about, guys. So a lot of levers, but then it gets really individualized because we just have to make sure that the client can actually recover from the work that we're giving them and the progression that we're asking them to do. All right, how in the world do you apply this? What I'm gonna ask you to do is to keep this really simple. Okay, start with context, write the goal, and list constraints in one line, okay, when you sit down to design for your next person. Choose your weekly priority patterns. Pick 3 priorities that match the person or their goals or your goals for them. Okay, so if you're training 3 days per week, just pick a priority for each one of those days in resistance training. Then build each day with pattern balance, upper lower balance, really thinking through, I don't want to interfere with the priority that I'm hitting today. And if we're stacking these days back to back, I don't want to interfere with the priority that I'm hitting tomorrow. Okay. Hit upper and lower each session. So again, I would recommend trying to split it 1-to-1, upper lower, unless there's a reason to not do that. And a good reason to not do that is, hey, I really want to prioritize, lower body development or the squat pattern specifically over this cycle. So then I get it. Okay. Choose a structure. Okay. So we talked about just 2, but there's many more, right? Are you going to use supersets across? Are you going to go a sole set at the top where the priority is the priority at the top? If you do that, so if you do like the A and then B1, B2, C1, C2, don't try to create efficiencies in that A. So rest isn't going to be like 90 seconds, maybe not even 2 minutes. It's probably going to be 3 to 4 minutes if we're not supersetting. So you just want to make sure if that is a priority, that people are getting plenty of rest prior to hitting sets 2, 3, and if you're doing 4 sets and beyond. And then finally, choose one progression lever for the entire cycle. Okay, keep it to like a 4 to 6 week cycle, but choose one progression lever and just play with that for the entire cycle. Keep it simple, keep it measurable, and keep it really clear from your client standpoint in terms of, hey, this is the progression lever that we're looking at. Here's my expectations over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Just because I want to give you guys a little bit more context and a little bit more insight into kind of how, my brain works when I design these programs. I'm going to upload a full 4-week split. So it'll be using the principles that we talked about today. I'll be really clear on what the priorities are and the accessory work and all of that. So I'm going to upload that into LearnRx, and then we're going to use that as a template, a usable template for you and your clients in CoachRx. So you can access in LearnRx as well as CoachRx. So if you are not in LearnRx, use the code frameworks and we'll give you 25% off. So thousands of hours of coaching content in there, coaching education content in there, as well as a lot of programs. This podcast sits here as well, and we give you guys a little bit of extras as well with this podcast. If you're not in CoachRx, follow the link below to start your free 14-day trial, but always remember to build with context. So when we're designing training programs, always think about the person in which we're designing those training programs for. Think about, if you're not using patterns, I would encourage you to start to really shift your mindset to like training the patterns, okay? Train the patterns over the muscles. And finally, make sure that you're prioritizing what matters for the person in which you're working with. Awesome, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.